Hello, everyone, and welcome to Get Hired Live. I'm your host, Andrew Seaman, LinkedIn's managing editor for jobs and career development. I'm joining you live from the Empire State Building in the heart of New York City, and I am so happy that you're all here. We have people from all over the world. I just saw Michael from, I believe, Portland, Jacqueline from Kenya. We have Paul from Florida, Dolores from Texas, our dear friend Dolores, Lisa from California, Sharon from Arizona, Megan from Ohio, and Cynthia from Kansas. So keep introducing yourselves and tell us a little bit, not just about where you're from, but about your career, about your job search, and really what you want to do with it. Because, careers, job searches, they aren't stagnant. People like to move around. Maybe you want to move into a new field. Maybe you want to get a new job. Tell us a little bit about it. And then once you see other people who maybe have something you can relate to, maybe they're looking to get into the aviation industry, maybe they're looking to get into culinary arts, and you have some connection with that, connect with them, reach out and say, hey, I have some experience in that field, or I would really like to get into that field too. Some of the best messages I get after this show are from people who've connected and ended up helping each other with their job search or career, because really networking is the cornerstone of a successful job search, a successful career, and there's no better time to start than right now. So be sure to make those connections and also get your questions in, because we're going to be talking today all about how to find an employer who fits your wants and needs. And we have an absolutely incredible guest here today. We have Natalie Rothman, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer from Advanced Auto Parts. So welcome, Natalie.
Hi. Thanks, Andrew. So great to
Hi.
be
Well,
here.
thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to have you here.
Absolutely. And love your background. I'm envious.
Thank you. Yes, you can't. It's hard to beat New York City, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Natalie, can we start off by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your career?
Sure. Yeah. So I have about 25 years of experience now in HR. It's funny, you just talked about networking. Almost every job I've had is through networking, either people that I knew from school or outside of school. So networking is really important. So people have questions about that, please fire away. I joined Advanced Auto Parts in 2016, and I joined to be part of the transformation team. It was a company that we're now about 90 years old. We sell auto parts and we're a retailer. But I was brought in to help build out an HR function, improve business operations. Previous to Advanced Auto Parts, I worked at PepsiCo for almost 10 years and was also an employment lawyer that earlier on in my career, and use that experience every day. So I have kind of a broad-based background of executive search, employment law, HR business partner, and have now been a CHRO for a little over 6 years.
That's so wonderful. And also, I'm so happy to have you here too, because I think Advanced Auto Parts is one of those companies that is really a part of a lot of communities. It's just one of those places where you see it, the logo, and that it's there. And, we have people from all over the world. And I just want to give another quick shout out to Charles from Nashville, Jacqueline from San Francisco, Joanne from Seattle, Rodney from Maryland, Jim from North Carolina, Stephanie from Detroit, Emo from Los Angeles, and Denise from the UK. So welcome to all of you. And Natalie, we're here today to talk about finding an employer that meets your wants and needs. And I know, people have different ideas of what an employer should be, but why is it important to find a company to work for that you sort of connect with and that can provide you what you need?
Andrew, it's such a good question. I mean, you spend so much time at work, right? That you want to make sure you're with an employer where you can bring your whole self to work, feel good about where you work. I think it's really interesting. I mean, I've seen definitely a trend with job seekers being a lot more self-aware in terms of what they want. I think job seekers are definitely more vocal about what they need, not only from an employer, from a career standpoint, but what also they need from a personal standpoint. I think COVID, people really opened up during COVID in terms of what was going on with their personal lives. And I don't think that trend is going to go away. So I think that it's really important for someone to express to an employer if they need flexibility, what they need in the role, what they're looking for in their career. And then also I've seen a shift in employers, and definitely we have a shift at Advanced Auto Parts. We try to consider the whole person. So, if someone's in a travel heavy job, are they going to be able to do that? Will they be able to balance, their personal life and their commitments outside of work? So we try to make sure that we understand what people need, and then we tailor not only our recognition and our total rewards packages, but also make sure that they're in the right job. So I think it's a great conversation to have. I'm really glad that people are being more vocal about it, because there's nothing worse than getting a new job, going to an employer and not really knowing what you signed up for, and not feeling like, you made the right decision because you didn't do the research and didn't do the homework.
Yeah. And I think, obviously you as an employer know sort of what you can give to an employee, and you can sort of
Mhm.
feel them out a little bit in the
Mhm.
interview process. But really, it's up to a job seeker and just a person to know what they want and need from a company or their career. And how do you figure that out? Because I assume that's the first step in this whole process.
It is. I mean, fortunately, there's so many tools out there that you can look at. I mean, the first thing that I would recommend is go to the company's website, see what they're posting about. Do they have an ESG report? What are they doing to give back to their communities? Is it a mission-driven company? Do they care about DEI? Do they have employee resource groups? Or they're doing things that are good for the environment? And then social media is, a tool that we have now that we didn't have 10, 15 years ago the way that we do now. So, people definitely go to LinkedIn to see who their connections are and see if people have worked at a particular company. I've had people reach out to me about companies that I've worked for in the past, and that's a great way to get sort of an off the record on what a company is like. People go to Glassdoor to see how companies are rated, and then they see what postings there are on not only LinkedIn. It's a great way to see what a company's priorities are based on what they're posting. But Facebook, Instagram, I mean, there's a lot of different ways where you can get different information to really understand what a company's all about. But I also think another great way is talking to people, not only current employees, and hopefully you'll have the opportunity to do that in the interview process, but also people that have worked there previously to get their input.
Yeah. And when it comes to sort of figuring out, okay, what really resonates with you, and sort of you take that back and you say, okay, is this the place where I want to sort of set up shop and be a good employee? How do you know if those things are sort of, because a lot of times when you're in the interview process, I think a lot of people, they nod along and they say, oh, that sounds great. That's fantastic. But how do you know if that really resonates with you and is going to keep you content beyond, 3, 4 months and a year?
Yeah, so I think there's two ways to answer that question. I think the first thing is you got to be honest with yourself on what you really want and what are your non-negotiables when you're looking for, a new company. I mean, you want to love the people that you're working with. You want to feel like your manager is somebody that you can learn from and grow and develop. But managers change, so you want to make sure there are other people in the company that you like, and that you feel like it's potentially a place where you can see yourself. And then I think there's a way to research to see if a company is walking the talk or not. I mentioned a few things earlier, but understand what the company is doing to give back, understand what issues are important to you. And then I would look online and ask the company for examples of ways that they do that versus, a lot of head nodding, because you're right. I mean, that can absolutely happen. But, if a company is, donating money or time to underserved communities and someone wants to be with a mission driven company, I mean, that's a great example of, them taking that first step. So I think you want to see sort of concrete examples, either, on their website, their annual report, their ESG report, through social media. And I think it's okay to ask the question too. I mean, I think in the past, again, a lot of job seekers, were, they felt like the employer had the upper hand. I really think it's a job seekers market. And I think it's okay to ask all these questions with specific examples to know that they're really walking the talk.
Yes, and I know so many people out there, they're probably seeing a lot of headlines about layoffs and stuff like that. But really, if you look at the numbers, it's still a job seeker market. The labor market is still really healthy. So,
Mhm.
even though you see reports of layoffs happening here or there, it does not necessarily mean that applies to the whole labor market.
Yep.
So I always like to remind people of that.
Mhm.
And I just want to, we have some people jumping into the comments, and I just want to, Sweta, she says, finding right employers starts with being self-aware and asking the right questions during interviews to spot green and red flags. And I think that's, aligns with what you suggest. And then Dolores says, I wonder if finding an employer that meets our wants and needs is more accessible than we think. And I think, Dolores is spot on, is that it really is sort of that two-way communication. So, if you think a good employer is not out there, they are. It's just you have to look for it. And just a quick reminder to
Absolutely.
everyone who's watching to get your questions in, because we're going to be taking them at the end of the show. And obviously, Natalie is such a great wealth of resources because she is in this job. She's the one who is helping hire an army of people around the country. So be sure to get your questions in. And my next question for you, Natalie, is how do you know when you've sort of found the right company? Because a lot of times, or in most cases, you're not going to find a company that's going to give you everything you want and everything that you need. So how do you know when to not really settle, but say, okay, this is the right company for me?
Yeah, I think it's deciding on, your non-negotiables, right? No one can tell you what feels right, but I think really deciding on where are you in your career? Are you putting the foot on the gas? Do you want to be at a place where, you are going to be able to grow your career quickly? Does this company spend time developing their team members, or are you in a different place where I mean, there was a point in time, my son's 14, but I remember when I was pregnant with him and I was working at PepsiCo. It's getting dark in here. Sorry about that. But I remember, and we are eco-friendly. That's why it's getting dark. See, so I'm walking the talk, Andrew, not just making that up. But there was a point in time where I didn't want to travel a lot, having a baby. So I think personally think about, what are your non-negotiables? And then I think spending the time to getting to know people. I mean, a lot of times we'll take a candidate out to a store, to a distribution center, or sometimes out to lunch. I recommend that people go look in our stores and see what it's like, see what it's experiencing. Don't tell anyone that you're there. We have mystery shoppers that come in all the time. That's what I did before I joined Advance. So I think once you know what your non-negotiables are, do the due diligence, meet with people, ask to meet with people on the team, ask to meet with other people that maybe the manager has on the team. I mean, I encourage people to do that all the time because you want to know what are they like as a manager. And then I think the most important thing is trust your gut. I mean, if you have reservations and you're not sure why, try to do the research and figure out why you're having the reservations you're having. But at the end of the day, your gut is typically right. So if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't, and it may not be the right job for you.
Yeah, I think that is totally correct. And something that I want to ask you about too is because, we all evolve over time. The person that I am today is not the person I was 5 years ago, or and my needs aren't the same. So, how do you sort of check in with yourself to figure out what exactly you need and want at that moment? And what if the job you have does not do that anymore? What if they don't meet your needs and wants?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of listing out what are your personal goals, what are your professional goals. I mean, hopefully, most people have heard of having sort of your own, personal board of directors. They're people that you'll confide in. They'll be friends, they'll be family members. Maybe they're people in your community, your temple, your church that you talk to about where you are in your life and your career. And there are going to be times where, as you said, maybe the job isn't meeting what you need. I think that talking to a bunch of different people about what's realistic for everything that you have on your plate is going to help center you and help you figure out, okay, maybe right now I do need to prioritize my career based on, your age, your education, where you want to go. Maybe you have mobility things that you need to work about. You have a spouse that's going to be relocating in a year for their job. So I think really listing out what's important will help drive the conversation around how you want to handle your career. And if you don't feel like your current job is fulfilling, have a conversation with your manager about it and tell them why, because there could be another opportunity in your company that's a better fit for where you are. But you also have to flag to your employer too, if you're changing, maybe you don't need as much flexibility. Maybe you want your foot on the gas and you want to go faster and you want to do more, or the reverse of that. I mean, people have lots of commitments outside of work that employers need to be aware of. And most employers, if you're a good employee and they see your potential, they're going to accommodate you. So don't be afraid to have the conversation, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think that is great advice. In fact, there are some employers out there that have stay conversations where,
That's
they're
right.
very proactive about it, where they say, "Hey, we just want to let you know you're valued and we want to know if there's anything we
Yep.
can do to sort of help you along." Going back to the job search, people who maybe they like an employer and they're almost there. They say, "Okay, I really like this employer, but maybe I need a little bit more money or there's a benefit that I would really like." should job seekers be concerned about being direct during interviews and the hiring process about their wants and needs to say, I really like your company and I really want this job, but I would really need X amount of money, or I would need, this benefit before I say yes. Is that something that they should be direct about during the process?
Absolutely. I mean, the worst thing you can do is take a job and then be resentful that, the employer didn't give you what you wanted. It's the how you do it. I think that if a job seeker is gracious, kind of lays out, hey, I really want to work here. I'm really interested in this company, but these are the two things that I'm going to need. More times than not, if you did well in the interview process and the employer really likes you, they will figure out either a way to compromise with you or make it happen. So, again, unless it's something completely outrageous that they can't do, and they'll tell you that too, but it's better to ask. And as long as you ask in a gracious way, the employers will take that in the right way, and they'll actually appreciate that you spoke up in advance versus getting in a company and then you're there for 30 days and you kind of bring up these things that should have been brought up during the interview process. That won't go well.
Yeah, I think, the realistic part of that is so important, because we could all say, hey, I want $1 million to accept this job, but
Right.
that's probably not going to happen. So you need to be
Right.
realistic about what your asks are for. And, on the same topic, as someone who obviously has navigated an incredibly successful career and has also, leads a human resources department and oversees hiring, what is your tips for people going into the negotiation process? Because I think a lot of times that is one of the most anxiety sort of inducing parts of the whole job search.
Yep. Well, know what your state law is, first of all, because there are certain states where people can't ask you what your cash compensation is. Most states you can ask about if you have long-term incentives. So know sort of what an employer can and can't ask you starting out. Most employers will say, what are your compensation expectations, or what are your expectations for the role? And I think really think about it and think about what's reasonable. Do your research, find out market competitiveness for the job that you're in. Again, a lot of this information is now published. In some states, it's published by law, so it's much easier to find out than before. And then I think it's the how you do it. I think you need to list out the things that you absolutely need to have versus things that are nice to have. And I wouldn't, ask for 5,000 things. I'd be really specific about, these are the things that I need to join this company. I'm excited about joining the company. I think, if you are upfront in negotiation, if you're gracious about it, if you're appreciative of the offer. I mean, that's one thing I really like, when people say, thank you so much for the offer, we want to work there, versus, not being gracious. It just will, go a lot easier for the candidate. But definitely speak up about it. It's not unusual. It's okay. It's not like someone's going to pull an offer from you because, you sort of outlined what it is that you need. If anything, an employer is going to really appreciate that you were speaking up and you were transparent about it on the outset.
Yeah, I also want to underline something you just mentioned, which is be excited about the job if you actually want it, and tell them you want the job.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I encounter people who are often, they play hard to get almost in an interview. They
Right.
sort of say, "Oh, I'm not really looking, but I'll hear what you have to say," and
Right.
something like that. And no one wants to really employ someone or hire someone who just sort of kind of wants to work there.
That's right.
It is a job, but at the same time, they want people who are excited and actually want to do that work and align with it. So I think what you said about, tell them that you're excited and appreciative of the offer, is a big thing. So I just wanted to underline that,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of people forget that.
And you may get selected too over another candidate if you're excited about the job. I mean, if there are two candidates that have very similar experience and you're both qualified, and one seems kind of lukewarm and the other one is saying, when can I start? I mean, most employers are going to go with a candidate that's excited versus not excited.
Yeah. In fact, I had someone who who was watching this show, and they heard me suggest, hey, you should tell the employer that you're excited and all that during the interview process. And she said that when she started doing that, she actually got more offers. So,
Sure, yeah.
I'm not going to take credit for helping her get the job. That's all on the job seeker. But Hopefully it did move the needle a little bit for her.
Take a little credit.
And
That's
then my
good
last
advice.
question before we get to the member questions is, if there's something a person could do today to end up in the employer that really meets their wants and needs, what would you suggest they do?
I think do the research. Make sure that the employer is a good fit for you and you're a good fit for them, because I think that's something you'd want to demonstrate in the interview process. I think that if you are, not a good fit, you want to make sure that you you don't waste anybody's time, right? And or if you're not that interested in a role, I mean, you never want to burn any bridges in the process. But I would just say do your research, talk to people that are there, and then trust your gut. I mean, it is probably the most valuable tool that you have to determine whether the job and the company are the right things for you.
And that piece of advice leads us perfectly into our first question from Dolores. And Dolores wants to know, what should an individual take into consideration when there are negative online reviews? Is it up to each individual as to whether they want to take a chance on that employer or not? What's your advice with like online negative reviews?
It's a good question, Dolores. I mean, most companies are going to have mixed reviews. I mean, that's, I think, the reality. I think you need to figure out what are the reviews saying, and is there other information out there that disputes it or corroborates it? And then I think it's also okay to maybe, if you can try to find people that have worked at the company before, talk to them, and even talk to the company about it. Hey, I did my research, and there's some things coming up about the company. And I'm just curious, how would you respond to that? And most companies will, be glad that you raised it during the process, so they have a chance to address it. But I wouldn't completely discount a company if you see negative reviews. I mean, if you see all negative and no positive, that's probably a red flag. But a couple negative reviews, I think it's worth further research to decide, whether you believe in the commentary or not.
Yeah, and I think, if sociology, psychology have taught us anything, that people are more apt to give negative reviews or even just review if they've had a bad experience. So if people are content, they often don't go to a website and say how great it is to work there.
Right.
So, and we have this question from Nicole that I think is somewhat in the same line. And Nicole says, what questions should I ask in an interview to see if a potential employer would be a good fit? So what are your suggestions there?
Hi, Nicole. That's a good one. I mean, people always ask me about culture. What is it like to work here? What would people say it's like to work here? So I think the culture question is a good one. I also think, finding out a little bit more about promotions. How do they handle employee development? Because you want to go to a place where you can have a long career and you don't, at the end of the job, have nowhere to go. I also think career planning is important. I mean, when I interview people, I try to think about them not only for the job that I'm interviewing them for, but the next job after that. So I think a bunch of those questions should be able to help you determine whether it's a good fit or not.
That's great advice. And we have a question here from Stephanie, and this gets more into the negotiation process. And Stephanie wants to know, what if a company says that they have a specific compensation ceiling, but you're worth more?
Good question, Stephanie. Well, I think ask the company to be creative, right? Because maybe it's the cash compensation that has a ceiling, and most companies do. Most companies have ranges, so that is a fair statement. But can they do something else that's going to make you feel good about working there? Can they give you more vacation or PTO time? Can they give you some sort of sign-on? Some companies have phone allowances or car allowances. So I would just ask about other benefits that you might be entitled to, or that a company might be able to give you, where you'd feel better about the offer. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, if you do not feel like the compensation is the right compensation for where you are, and you're having questions about the company, trust your gut on that. And I would probably think about looking elsewhere or seeing what else is out there.
Yeah, I think that is great advice. And we have a question here from John. What's your advice for staying engaged at your employer, especially if you've been there a few years?
Yeah, good question, John. I mean, there's this hashtag out there, quiet quitting, right? About everyone's heard that. It's probably going to be another interview that Andrew does. So I think employers are really concerned about, team members staying engaged. I think if you've been in the role for a while, it's a great time to talk to your manager about what's new that you want to learn? Is there any, training through the company or online training that you can do that's going to help you grow and develop? I would raise your hand to take on a project. If there's another group that you're potentially interested in or another function that you're potentially interested in, talk to your manager about it, talk to your HR business partner about it, and say, hey, I'd love to serve as a mentor to somebody in this group so I can learn more about what they do, or onboard somebody that's coming, into this group, or work on a potential project. So I get, a sense of what this group does and whether I'd be interested in joining them or not. But there's always ways to continue to develop. If the person doesn't have management responsibility, can you, get management responsibility? Can you mentor an intern? Can you mentor a peer? So I think there's a lot of ways to stay fresh. But I think having that conversation with your manager on, I want to do more. I've been in the role for, quite some time, and let's brainstorm. And I think come to that conversation with ideas, but let's brainstorm on things that I can do to continue to contribute to the company and stay engaged.
Great advice. And we have another question here from Michael, and he uses the example of a CEO, but basically Michael wants to know, how do you reach out to a person that you've worked with about a possible position at their company? So what is your advice for doing an outreach like that with networking?
Yeah, I think it happens a lot, so it's not uncommon. So you should feel comfortable doing it. I think, what I would say is, I don't know if the search is confidential or not. If it's confidential, you'd have to think about how many people you're reaching out to and can you really do that. But I'm assuming it's not confidential. Then I would just send a note to the person and say, hey, we haven't talked in a long time, or you're in my network. I'm really interested in this job. Would you mind spending, a couple minutes with me or directing me to the right person so I can learn more about the opportunity? More times than not, people will send you to the right person if they're not the right person. But most people working at a company are going to take the time to talk to you or direct you to the right place where you can find out more information.
Yeah, especially if you have that established connection. Thank you so much, Natalie. I've had such a great time chatting with you. These conversations always go too fast, but I know everyone watching got so much out of this discussion. So thank you.
Great. Thanks for having me. This was great, Andrew. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Of course, thank you, Natalie, and thank all of you for watching and joining us from all around the world. We will be back on Friday. My colleague, Brandy Fowler, will be here, and she will be talking to Whitney Johnson, who is a LinkedIn learning instructor, about how to succeed during times of change. Again, that's September 30th. At 12 p.m. Eastern Time, and that is going to be Whitney Johnson talking about how to survive during times of change right here on the LinkedIn news page. And obviously, we always have great programming here, so stay tuned. And thank you just for joining us again. As we always talk about, this is a crazy time, and I'm so grateful to have such an amazing team here with me. So I just want to say a big thank you to Gianna, Derek, Elias, Taisha, Dave, Stephen, Wes, and Flo for helping me always put on this show. I'm so grateful. And until next time, take care of yourself. Like we said, the world's a crazy place, and you can only get hired. You can only be a good candidate and get ahead if you are safe and well enough to do so. So until next time, stay well and best of luck.